Ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome you to this first in a series of 4 concerts sponsored by the Bard Music Festival and by Tone, the Orchestra Now, and the Bard Conservatory of Music. So we are here in a giant tent. I don't know whether the videographers will be able to show you this giant tent, but it is indeed giant. And behind me are the string players of the Orchestra Now, which is in its 6th year and is a program for young professional musicians who have graduated from conservatory and get their orchestral and repertoire training and earn a master's in curatorial studies and music at the same time. They have recorded brilliantly and have had now 5 terrific seasons here and around other concert halls, including Carnegie Hall. And we're also helped by the Bard Conservatory of Music, which is our partner in this endeavor. And I want to thank the Fisher Center for the Performing Arts, whose staff and all the technical people associated with the center who have made this possible. So this is a giant tent. The string players are masked. They are socially distant. We are speaking to you without a mask simply to improve comprehension. There's no human being within 12 feet, so we are completely within the compliance regulations for the pandemic. And there's nobody here. The audience is non-existent except for yourselves, which I am very grateful for, and the technical people who have helped us. And I want to say a word to you and also to the players behind me. We are in a moment of extreme danger and also a moment of hope. Public culture, theaters, music making, particularly music making, is an art form that may have been born out of an aristocratic age, but it has settled very comfortably in a democratic age. To come together in a pluralist society, to sit next to someone who is not a friend, not even a neighbor, but a person from another country, with another religion, and share in the common experience of listening to music, a form of human communication that does not have ideologies except by imputation. There are no words, there are no images. There's nothing in music that could possibly offend anyone. There's nothing in music, in sound itself, to cancel. There's absolutely nothing that should offend us, but there's everything that should bind us. And that public culture is now interrupted. And when the pandemic is over, the question is, how will it continue? This is the future of our tradition of music, which is classical music, so-called concert music, and large scale, not the solo recital, not the even string quartet. But it was the instrument that allowed the imagination of the great operas, the great symphonic works to flourish. And it's itself about a community. It's about a free association, the right of free assembly and free expression. The first great choruses of the 19th century that inaugurated public music making were amateurs, people who did this for fun, who got together to make a large sound, to speak as a community despite all differences in one language, which is really not a language, which is the language of music. We musicians believe in the universality of all human beings on this planet. Music is an emblem, much like the environment. We all share it. We need to fight to keep this tradition of music making alive. There are no words to any of these pieces. They're just sound organized by the imagination of many composers. And I want to thank particularly the entire college here that has committed itself to the arts and has put its back behind the importance of the art. We often make the distinction between the essential worker and the inessential worker. We are not essential workers in the actual first line of need in health, but we are essential workers to democracy, and we are essential workers to culture. And I'm extremely proud of my colleagues. Now, the important thing is that these concerts have a theme. The Bard Music Festival, which was started in this tent, actually, for those with enough of a historical memory, before the glorious Fisher Center for Performing Arts was built in 2003, we were dedicated to something which will be familiar to every one of you as viewers. When we started the music festival, we had one assumption, that the way we told the history of music was very, very distorted, not accurate, not just. So as we tear down statues of Theodore Roosevelt and we rename programs at Princeton University, and we take out even the name down of the grandfather of the founder of this college, Samuel Bard, in the Columbia School of Medicine, that is an act of reinventing and retelling our own past. We have been at this, at the Bard Music Festival, for 30 years, contesting the standard way history is told. We believe as artists, just as we should believe as citizens, that the way we tell our past determines what we do in the present and what we believe for the future. We believe Christopher Gibbs, Irene Zedlacker, Robert Martin, Sarah Rothenberg, all the people who have been in the inner circle of planning, Richard Wilson, Byron Adams, scholars, we believe, and practitioners, that the old story of the three Bs, Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, was not really the real story. There was great music, great composers out there that people hadn't heard. Things that used to be considered wonderful that had dropped from the repertoire, often for reasons of politics. Maybe the identity of the composers, maybe their political views, maybe their interpersonal relations. Although some of the worst people in history have become enshrined, like Richard Wagner. So, after 30 years of doing this, when COVID struck and the protests over the violence against our fellow black citizens came to the fore, and we asked the question, how to bring music back? We had the inspiration to take one of the pieces, the first piece you'll hear tonight, by William Grant Still, the African-American, black American composer from the 20th century, Out of the Silence. And we created a program which has a simple logic. There are 4 concerts, and each concert has 2 or 3 composers on it. And in each concert, there's one very well-known piece by a composer whom we have studied in the Bard Music Festival, to whom we've devoted an entire summer season and a scholarly book, as is our habit. The first one tonight is Mendelssohn. It will also, you'll hear Dvorak, Tchaikovsky, and Bartók. Why those? Because each of them is notorious for their relationship to their identity as a citizen. Mendelssohn, as a Jew who converted and witnessed the failure of true civic equality and assimilation and acculturation in the positive way into German society. Dvorak, who was popular in Germany because he was exotic as a Czech composer who came to the United States and was the first to argue that true great American music would derive from the traditions of indigenous people and the descendants of slaves. Tchaikovsky, because he got caught in the crossfire between people who thought he wasn't Russian enough and those who thought he was too Russian. Some Germans looked down on him as having written really no real great music, just simply evocative, emotional music. And finally, Béla Bartók, who rediscovered what he thought were the origins of Hungarian folk music. And first for the nationalist impulse, and then discovered that all that folk music in the Balkans came from North Africa. And then, when the Hungarian fascists thought to appropriate Bartók's achievement as an ethnomusicologist and as a proponent of the Hungarian for purposes which he did not agree with, he emigrated, came to the United States, and that he finally fought against fascism and for the international character of music, that even a folk music tradition had its roots with other societies and other civilizations, a true defender of democracy and an opponent of a nativist nationalism. So at this moment, where our own democracy is in peril, we hope this is a modest contribution to the revival of music and to bringing, in the spirit of the Bard Music Festival, composers and works, most of which many of you have never heard, and I hope you'll be delighted to have heard them. So it is now my pleasure to introduce one of my fantastic and most versatile colleagues, one of the eminent choral conductors of his generation, but a person who's done all kinds of things in music and heads the music program here at the college and is the associate conductor of the orchestra now. And he will conduct the first three pieces on the program and introduce them. So without further ado, thank you again very much for tuning in. It is a great tribute to us that you're with us. And so without further ado, James Bagwell. Good evening. Our last piece for the evening is by Felix Mendelssohn, who was born in 1809. He was distinguished by the fact that he was the grandson of probably one of the most famous philosophers of the 18th century, and certainly the most famous Jewish man in German culture. Moses Mendelssohn was a distinguished philosopher, a contemporary of Kant's, and Immanuel Kant had the greatest admiration for him. He was a major figure in both European and Jewish thought, and has works both in English and in Hebrew. He was a giant of a figure. His son, Abraham Mendelssohn, like many sons, had no intention of competing with his father, and he went into business. He ended up having a son who was the probably most famous, after Mozart, child prodigy in the history of music. And Abraham Mendelssohn was famous for saying that he lived most of his life being the son of his father, only to wake up to be the father of his son. His son Felix and his sister Fanny were brought up in very luxurious and wealthy circumstances in Berlin. And the talent of both children was evident. For those of you who are now homeschooling or have children or grandchildren or homeschooling is the oldest idea in the world, and if you're very rich, you can do it better than any school. School is a necessity of population. It's not inherently a virtue. And Felix Mendelssohn didn't go to school. Great people came to his house to teach him all kinds of things, languages, classical languages. He made a fantastic translation of the Roman writer Terence. And in any event, among the things that blossomed was his musical talent and that of his sister. And he was introduced to the most famous musician of Berlin, Carl Friedrich Zelter, who happened to have a very close friend, none other than the greatest writer in all of German history, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. And Zelter discovered the talent of this boy and introduced him to Goethe. In their correspondence, he says a very interesting thing. Zelter and Goethe exchanged the following view. Isn't it amazing that a Jew has creativity? You would never believe it, that from these people, real music can be made. They were in amazement, very proud of their liberality. The fact that he was Jewish was of concern to Abraham Mendelssohn. The progress in enlightenment and getting along seemed to indicate a future in which there would be no such distinctions. And therefore, Abraham Mendelssohn, when his mother died, converted himself and his children to Protestantism and changed his name to Bartholdy. And Felix Mendelssohn became a believing Christian, married the daughter of a Protestant minister, and produced music which made him the most important church composer in the Lutheran faith since J.S. Bach. Now, how's that for an object lesson? But he never forgot who he was. When Abraham Mendelssohn tried to tell him to change his name from Mendelssohn, which was like a signal, like sending one word signal of who you were, he refused. And he persisted on keeping the name Mendelssohn, and he was known as Felix Mendelssohn Bartholdy. Now to this piece. This is one of several string symphonies that Mendelssohn wrote. Now get this, between the ages of 11 and 14. We have a manuscript version of the orchestral version of this, which wins, which was done when he was 14. So this was probably written when he was 12. So if you're proud of your children or grandchildren, a little distance from that conceit is helpful when you confront Mendelssohn. This music at age 12 is probably only comparable, not to Mozart really, but to maybe Erich Wolfgang Korngold, who was also unbelievably mature as a young composer. You'll hear influences of C.P. Bach, Bach's son, J.S. Bach, Mozart, the magic flute, Haydn, and the last thing you'll hear little echoes of Beethoven. And remember, as you listen to the string symphony, by this young adolescent. Remember that Beethoven was alive when he wrote it and when it was first performed.